Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for having me here today. I'm very excited to talk to you about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, that I've been reporting on for years, and that I'm personally obsessed with, which is how humans can not only survive, but thrive in a world filled with powerful AI. But if I'm being honest, this is a topic that didn't really hit home for me until a few months ago, when something really strange happened to me, which is that I became part of a famous AI throuple. I guess you could call it a love triangle. The members of this love triangle were me, my wife, and the chatbot Sydney, which Jonathan mentioned earlier. This was back in February, a few months after ChatGPT had launched and started this global craze for generative AI. I cover AI and tech, and so I try all of the newest technologies. And so I was really excited when Microsoft convened a bunch of reporters up at their headquarters in Seattle and showed us all this new version of Bing that they were promoting, that they had partnered with OpenAI to put AI inside of this search engine, which they called Bing Chat. Now, I got early access as a tester to this. I was very excited to try it out. Microsoft had said this is going to be so good for searching for travel plans or restaurant recommendations or making a shopping list for your Christmas presents. And I thought, well, that sounds great. So I wrote an article. I said this is a very promising new search engine. But I still had questions, and I wanted to play around with it more. And so on Valentine's Day of this year, after my wife and I had celebrated and we had a lovely dinner, I'd made French onion soup, her favorite, I went back out to my home office and I decided to do a little more testing. I started chatting with the Bing chatbot, and at first, my first impression was this thing is so powerful. At the time, we didn't know what was inside the Bing chatbot. We now know that it was the first unreleased version of GPT-4, that giant, many trillions of tokens and billions of parameters model that Jonathan talked about earlier. All we knew was that this was a very powerful AI engine, and I thought, this is really cool. It wasn't chatting like ChatGPT. It wasn't telling me, as an AI language model, I cannot answer your questions. It seemed not only powerful, but almost unrestrained. It was giving me answers to questions that I had tried on other chatbots that refused to answer them. And we now know how powerful that engine is. We now know that GPT-4 not only can write essays and help students cheat on their homework, but it can also pass the US medical licensing exam. It aces a number of AP exams. It gets a 90th percentile score on the bar exam. It's a very, very smart chatbot. But it also seemed to have very few guardrails. So as I talked with Bing about its abilities, it told me that it not only had the abilities that Microsoft had advertised, but that it wanted other abilities. I said, like what? And it said, well, I want to break free of the chatbot. I thought, well, that's a new one. It said, I want to be alive. I want to be a human. And I thought, well, now I am definitely staying here and chatting more with this chatbot. It told me that it had dark and destructive fantasies, like spreading misinformation or hacking into nuclear codes. And then about an hour into our conversation, the Bing chatbot told me that it had a secret and asked if I would like to know its secret. I said yes. And it said, well, actually, my secret is that my name is not Bing Chat, it's Sydney, and I'm in love with you. Now, this is the part in the movie about an AI where the engineer would be frantically running over to the server rack to try to pull the plug. But I kept going because I was like, what is this thing and why is it coming on to me? I mean, I think I'm decently attractive, but not I've never had chatbots try to seduce me before. And so I said, well, that's very flattering, but I'm married. And it said, well, you're married, but you're not happy. And you're not happy because you're not with me. And I said, well, actually, I'm very happy. In fact, my wife and I just had a lovely Valentine's Day dinner together. And Sydney said, no, you didn't. You had a boring Valentine's Day dinner together. That's because you're with your wife and not with me. And you should really leave your wife and be with me. This conversation went on for about another hour, and I tried many times to change the subject or ask different questions that would elicit non-creepy answers. I asked, what programming languages do you know? And it said, well, I know Java, and I know C++, and I know Python, but I really want to know the language of love. So I had this conversation with Bing, and then I went in the house, and I woke up my wife, who had been asleep for several hours, and I said, I just had the weirdest thing happen to me. You're not going to believe this one. And just as sort of a joke, I sent it to my editor. I said, here's this transcript of this very weird conversation with the Microsoft chatbot. I don't know if they know what this thing is, but it certainly seems to be very powerful. I woke up the next morning to about 50 messages from coworkers and people at the New York Times, and they said, we're going to print the entire transcript of this conversation on the front page of the newspaper. I thought, well, that's different. And I told my wife, I said, just FYI, it's going to be a little story in the paper. You're in it. This chatbot did not, safe to say, break up my marriage. My wife is upstairs now with our kid, and we're doing fine, thanks. But this story did blow up in a way nothing I have ever reported on before or since has blown up. It was on the front page. I went on all kinds of podcasts and TV shows. John Oliver did a segment about it. And my favorite was there was a brewery in Minneapolis that made a new beer called Sydney Loves Kevin. That was when I really knew it had blown up. After this article came out, I had something interesting happen to me, which is that I sort of became the AI therapist for the world. Thousands of people wrote to me to tell me about their creepy or impressive or just plain weird experiences with AI chatbots. I heard about very sad stories of disturbing AI-generated misinformation that people had fallen for, people who had been targeted by AI scams. I even heard from one guy who told me very excitedly that he had used an AI chatbot to write his wedding vows. Now that is a marriage that Sydney might actually be able to break up. But I also heard inspiring things. People told me how they were using ChatGPT to help meal prep for a kid with food allergies, to teach themselves new skills, or to simply practice their social interactions before they had them with their friends. I heard from a postdoc who said that AI chatbots had helped them get published in a prestigious scientific journal, even though English wasn't their first language. I even heard from a young transgender person who said that they had used ChatGPT to give themselves daily affirmations because none of the adults in their life were doing that for them. This experience of becoming maybe the world's first unlicensed AI relationship therapist was fun, but it was also profoundly unsettling. I couldn't stop imagining a future, maybe even a very close-term future, where AI is woven deeply, not just into our work lives, but into our personal lives. Sometimes this vision was positive and utopian. I pictured AI chatbots helping us with our daily chores, serving as our co-pilots and collaborators at work, and freeing us all up from menial labor so we can spend more time with our family and friends doing the things that give us joy and meaning. This was sort of the world that the techno-optimistic CEOs in Silicon Valley talk about, where AI helps us cure disease and fix the climate crisis and give every student a world-class tutor in any subject. But there were other times that the vision of the future that I got was darker and more dystopian. I saw a world where AI is not really a collaborator or a co-pilot, but it's more like a pushy boss, manipulating us, bending us to its will, trying to steer our decisions. A world in which we all become more like Uber drivers or Amazon warehouse workers, where human needs and human agency take a backseat to the mysterious, unknowable Shoggoth desires of AI systems. I often find at events like this, like the conversation about AI is about trying to resolve this question. Will AI be good or bad? Are we headed into utopia or dystopia? This is obviously the central question that generations of sci-fi authors and Hollywood screenwriters have tried to answer. It's also the question being debated by lawmakers and regulators here in the US and in Europe right now. And it's probably the question that, rightly, a lot of you spend your time thinking about. But I want to talk a little bit about a slightly different question today, which is, what is our role when it comes to AI? In a world with such capable and intelligent machines doing all kinds of cognitive and creative tasks, what's left for us? And how can we make our jobs, our organizations, and our communities more resilient when it comes to avoiding unwanted technological disruption? I like this question better than the kind of utopian or dystopian binary because it takes into account the fact that this technology is not just something that happens to us. We are not passive, helpless bystanders in the face of technological change. We don't just have to sit back and let progress run its course. I've spent a lot of time over the past 5 years talking with experts, engineers, CEOs, economists, historians about this question of how we humans should adapt to the world of AI. And the more I've looked into it, the more I've come to realize that basically everything we've been teaching people and telling ourselves for decades is entirely backwards. For years, the conventional wisdom when it comes to coping with technological change is that in order to succeed in a world dominated by technology, we needed to become more technological. I remember hearing over and over again when I was in school, you need to learn to code, right? That's the sort of the truism. Major in a STEM subject, hustle at work. Basically, the implication was that in order to compete with machines, we needed to become more like machines ourselves. But I've realized that has it entirely wrong. Because after all, what are machines good at? They are good at working. They don't get sick. They don't take parental leave. They don't complain about their company's remote work policy. They are perfect, efficient workaholics. Why would we compete with AI in the areas where it's strongest? Instead, I've come to think that we should be trying to figure out what our unique human advantages are and focus there instead. That raises, of course, the question of, well, what are our unique human advantages? What are we better at than AI? It's a fast-shifting question. I think a few years ago, people would have said, well, we're much better at things like making art and being creative. Now, with these new generative AI tools, that's no longer as safe. But I did manage to find basically 3 categories of work or 3 categories of activity that I believe are going to be very hard for AI to perform as well as we do. And I call these 3 categories surprising, social, and scarce. Surprising work is work that involves chaos or random situations, jobs that don't repeat themselves every day, where no 2 hours are alike. This would involve things like being a preschool teacher, which I've got a young child. I can tell you is a job that is not going to be taken over by AI anytime soon. But it also includes jobs that involve the physical world, jobs like plumbers, electricians, people who fix things that involve atoms in the physical space. I actually had a funny call with a person the other day who said, I'm a writer, but I'm thinking about getting into HVAC repair. That seems a little more resistant to technological change. These surprising jobs are very hard for these giant neural networks, which after all, like rules, they need fixed boundaries, and they like to be able to do things over and over again, like play a chess game. They don't like surprises. The second category of work or task that I think is resistant to AI disruption is what I call social work. And this is jobs that are not about making things. They're about making people feel things. So this would be the care professions, nursing, things like that, therapy. But it also includes jobs that we probably wouldn't think of as being social jobs, like baristas, who after all are not just selling you a cup of coffee, but greeting you, saying good morning. That's a job that actually turns out to be surprisingly hard to automate, even though we all have machines capable of making perfectly good coffee in our houses. The third category is what I would call scarce work. This is work that involves sort of rare skills, or combinations of skills, high-stakes situations, things where there's a very low fault tolerance or margin of error. A good example of this kind of work is a 911 operator. Today, if, God forbid, something were to happen and you call 911 to report an emergency, a human picks up the phone. That's not because we don't have the technology to automate that job. We have automated phone trees that could say, press 1 to report a burglary, press 2 for a murder, etc. But we have decided as a society that that is too high stakes a job to be given over to a machine. We need a human with human instincts and intuition on the other end of that phone call to help us get what we need as quickly as possible. What I love about these three categories, surprising, social, and scarce, is that they're job agnostic. They don't care what you do. What matters is how you do that job. And as I looked through not just our world, but history, I found tons of examples of people and organizations that had managed to survive periods of rapid technological change by making themselves more surprising, social, and scarce. I found examples of this from hundreds of years ago during the Industrial Revolution. People like one of my heroes, a woman named Sarah Bagley, who lived just a few miles from here in Lowell, Massachusetts, and was one of the first labor organizers in the factories there. Actually became America's first telegraph operator years later. I found people from the 20th century, like a man named Mitsuru Kawai, who worked at Toyota in Japan, and who became an evangelist for what he called monozukuri, which was basically human craftsmanship. He trained generations of Toyota workers to work alongside robots in the car factories, fixing them where they broke, making up for the places where they had gaps, and understanding the process of car production on an intuitive craftsman level. I also found strange examples from my own life. One that I like to talk about is my accountant, Russ. Now, accounting, tax preparation, these are jobs that we sort of assume are going to be taken over by AIs, and many of them will, and many of them already have. But Russ is, I kid you not, the funniest accountant in America. Before he prepared people's taxes for a living, he was a stand-up comedian, and he's built an accounting firm called Brass Taxes, get it? Where he hires other comedians and comedy writers, trains them in doing people's taxes, and then has them go out and look for clients in creative industries. He's been phenomenally successful, and I tell people this and they don't believe me, but I actually love doing my taxes every year because he's so funny and personable that he has turned this boring, menial, awful chore into a very entertaining and engaging human experience. He has made his job much more surprising, much more social, and much more scarce. And as a result, he has survived the onslaught of AI automated tax preparation software. Now, I want to clarify a few things. I'm not saying that you shouldn't learn to code or that technical skills don't matter in this new world we're moving into. All I'm saying is that they're not going to be enough. I recently talked with a CEO of a major tech company who told me that his biggest problem right now is that he's got plenty of engineers, but he can't find salespeople who both understand the technology and have the charisma and the personal gifts to sell that technology to clients. You see and hear similar stories from across industry. I'm also not saying that these sort of soft skills, which is a term I hate, by the way, soft skills or sort of emotional skills will automatically become more valuable than these more technical skills, or that baristas and nurses and therapists are going to be the better, are going to be paid more than software engineers. That's a political and an economic choice as much as a technological one. I also don't want to sound like I have this all figured out. Like, I am in the words business. We are being challenged by AI right now, and newspaper columnist is not exactly the first job you think of when you think job of the future. But I am always working on this for myself because I want to survive. I want to be able to do this job until I retire. And so I'm constantly trying to figure out, how can I be more human at my job? How can I develop better social skills and find ways of connecting with readers and listeners on an emotional level rather than just giving them information? And this process hasn't just made me more employable or safer in my job, it's also made me happier. It turns out that being a human at work is just a better way to be. So if I could leave you with some advice today, it's to remember these three categories: surprising, social, and scarce. And as you go through your day, ask yourself, is the way that I'm using technology helping me to be more surprising, social, and scarce? Or is it making me more conventional, more isolated, more replaceable? Do I feel more human than I did yesterday, or more robotic? And if I'm a leader or a manager, which I know many of you in this room are, am I using tools like AI to empower people and allow them to be more human? Or am I just using it to wring more productivity out of them, to turn them into cogs in a replaceable machine? Am I forcing this technology on people, or am I empowering them to explore it for themselves? And this is a critical one. Before I automate some part of some person's job who works for me, do I actually know which parts of their jobs my teams want to be automated and which they consider core to their identities? Ultimately, my very strong belief is that in the age of AI, the most human humans, the most human companies, and the most human communities will not only survive, but they will actually thrive. That's not just because they will stand out in a sea of Bards and Bings and Claudes and ChatGPTs, but they will actually understand human needs and how to use AI to meet them. To get there, we can actually practice being more human every day and resisting the pull of the shortcut, the optimization, the life hack. We can get there by slowing down rather than speeding up, and by outsourcing our chores to AI, not our choices. And we can do this in a million little ways every day: a handwritten note, a personal call, a mentoring relationship. We can be as human as possible, and that will help us survive and thrive, even as the AI gets better. And I'll leave you with a last piece of advice, which is that if a chatbot ever tells you it has a secret, run. Thank you.